Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. This week I was given a commission to paint a Beholder mini, which could be used in games of D&D. The model is a 3D print and the only request was paint this green, so join me as I get to come up with my own paint scheme for a Beholder and see how I paint when I don't have a paint scheme to follow. So this is the model I'm going to be painting, which as you can see I've primed black to give a nice smooth, even base coat for the rest of the colours to work from. Now as the skin is supposed to be green, the first colour I'm coming in with is Caliban green, and I'm going to paint this all over the skin and the tentacles to the model. This is going to take a couple of layers to build up to solid coverage. I'm just going to make sure I apply Caliban green to all of the skin to this Beholder. Now at certain points you'll see that there's a seam in the middle of this model. Part of the commission was to leave it so it can remain open, as the model's actually for my friend's son, so that's why you might see the seam. Don't worry about it. Without the blue tack and stuff in there, the two parts do fit together. So I'm painting all of the skin with the Caliban green. So this is going to take a little while. This is the main body to the model, so I'm just making sure I coat all of the skin with some Caliban green until I get a nice solid coverage all over the skin to this Beholder. I'm making sure I work it into all of those recesses, so it's in all of the darkest areas. And after a couple of layers of Caliban green, I've got a nice solid coat all over the body to the Beholder. So now I'm coming in with some wire flash, and I'm going to dry brush this all over the miniature. For this one here, it can be almost more like an overbrush. I just want to leave that Caliban green in the darkest areas of the model and catching the rest of it with a dry brush of wire flesh. Rather than shading and bringing this model back, I'm just going to use a series of dry brushes, getting progressively lighter to create a really interesting effect on the skin. As the green was the only order in the commission, the rest of this is sort of freeform for myself, so I decided that by doing this dry brush effect, it should give a really nice skin colour, create a lot of interest on the model, pick out all of these really small details that are in this 3D print, and at the end we'll just give a really nice looking skin to the model. So I'm just giving this overbrush of wire flesh all over the Beholder, catching all of the raised areas, but leaving that Caliban green showing in the recesses. And with the dry brush applied, you can see how it's brightened out that skin, but we still got all of the depth from the earlier colour in the recesses. And now with some warpstone glow, I'm applying another dry brush all over the model. For this one I am going to be a little bit lighter, focusing it up more onto the raised areas of the model, so I still leave a bit of that wire flesh showing through. But this is the colour that's really going to brighten up that model, give it a sort of ethereal creature-like look. So I'm just making sure that I dry brush all over the Beholder, but leaving the Caliban green in the deepest recesses and the wire flesh still showing through. With this dry brush, it's easy to come over gently with the first pass, and if I feel like I need to add some more later, it's much easier to add more layers of dry brush than it is to take some away. So I'm just making sure I dry brush back all over the model again, slightly lighter, just catching all of the details with some wire flesh. And with that warpstone glow applied, you can see how it's really brightened up that model. So there's just one more dry brush to apply to the skin, and then that will be all of the green skin painted. For this I'm using moot green. And with this one I'm being a little bit more selective, being really gentle and just applying from the top downwards. So it will leave all of the other colours in all the shadows and darker areas. It's just brightening up those most raised and upwards facing surfaces, bringing them to the brighter colour, giving the impression of light catching on some of these raised areas. So I'm focusing this on an up to down motion. So I'm just catching those upwards facing surfaces and applying a much lighter dry brush of moot green, just as one final highlight to the miniature. At this stage it's going to look quite rough and ready, but as I start painting in a few of the other details later on, that'll tie the whole model together. This dry brush effect should look really good on the finished product. And with that moot green applied, you can see how it's brightened up that skin, really brought out all of the details and added some interest to this model. So the next thing I'm going to paint are all of those grisly teeth. For this I'm using Rawk flesh first. I'm just going to apply this in a couple of layers all over the teeth to the model. So obviously I'm being really careful when I get near the gums and the areas that I want to be left green, but I'm making sure I pick out all of those teeth with a couple of layers of Rawk flesh. So I've decided for this model I'm going to avoid using shades. I'm just going to do quite a simple but very sort of contrasting painting effect on the model. So it should give a really nice effect without being too overblown, because this isn't going to be a gaming piece. It's just to sit on my friend's shelf. So I'm just going to bring out those details in a way that looks quite good, more for a toy than a model. So I'll just make sure I carefully pick out all of these teeth with some Rawk flesh. And with the teeth picked out, you can see how he's got a gnarly set of gnashes on him now. So I'm going to give these a slight highlight. First of all, with some deepkin flesh. I'm going to pick out the central line, going down each of the teeth and the edges as well, painting these with nice fine lines coming towards the tip at the end of each of the teeth. I'm trying to keep these lines quite thin, but I'm making them large enough so that in at least the lower halves I can add another colour later. I'm just going around the mouth, picking out all of the teeth with a highlight of deepkin flesh. Make sure I keep it on that central line and at the very edges. So this is going to give the impression of really sharp teeth on the model. And with the deepkin flesh applied, it's picked out those edges. And now with some white scar, I'm going to apply a smaller edge highlight, sort of just in the lower half to lower third of each of the teeth. I'm just picking these areas out with an edge highlight of white scar within the deepkin flesh. This is just going to give the impression of those teeth being really sharp at the end. Got a little bit of interest on the model. And this will just really finish off the mouth of this beholder. So I'm just applying this thin edge highlight to the tips of the teeth. And with the teeth picked out, the next thing I'm going to paint are the eyes on the model. For this I'm starting off with corn red. I'm starting out with the big eye in the middle. Just going to carefully apply a base coat of corn red to all of the eye. See, this one here's got this sort of nuclear symbol in the middle. I'm going to paint that shortly, so it doesn't matter if I get some paint over it now. But I'm just making sure I pick out all of the eye with some corn red. And I'm doing the same to all of the ones on the stalks as well. Being careful around the skin, just making sure I pick out all of the eyes with a base coat of corn red. I'm being very careful around the skin. I don't want to paint over the stuff I've already dry brushed, but I'm making sure I get a nice solid coat to all the eyeballs. And after a couple of layers of corn red, I've got a nice solid coat to all of the eyes. So now I'm coming in with some Mephiston red. And for this I'm thinning it down more than usual, so it's down to like a glaze consistency. I'm going to apply this sort of in the middle of the eye, making sure I leave a bit of that corn red showing through. But I'm glazing this over the rest of the eye. And in a couple of steps I'm going to build up a nice transition, so it's just going to give the effect of sort of light in the eye. Give a nice transition through some colours. I'm doing the same to all the ones on the stalks as well. Just glazing on a bit of Mephiston red, focused towards the centre of the eyes. And with that Mephiston red glazed on, you can see how it's brightened up the middle, but it's not got a too stark of a line. And now with some Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm doing the same again, glazing this on but into an even smaller area, focused really towards the middle of the eye. So this way I'll get a nice sort of transition from the darker red to the brighter red, but hopefully without too stark of a transition between them. If you do find that the lines between the colours are a little bit too stark, you can glaze over a bit of the darker colour, and that should help hide the transition. And I'm doing the same to the ones on all the stalks as well, just glazing in a little bit of Evil Sun Scarlet in the middle. And with the red for the eyes painted, it's given quite an interesting look to the eyes, made them stand out a little bit more than if they were just a single flat colour. Now with some Avalan Sunset, I'm going to paint the central part to the main eye, so that was a sort of raised part in the middle of this nuclear symbol. So I'm just making sure I paint that with a couple of layers of Avalan Sunset, so I get a nice bright yellow sort of pupil for this model. Just being careful around the red, just applying a couple of layers of Avalan Sunset to the middle. And then I'm going to sink this into the slits in the middle of all of these eyes on the sticks. Sort of tie them into the main model, make them look like they're connected. And just very carefully applying some Avalan Sunset. And with that Avalan Sunset applied, there's just one final colour left to add to the eyes. And that's going to be with some Abaddon Black. I'm painting the nuclear symbol in the middle, so I'm very carefully picking out this raised part here, just catching all of these with a layer of Abaddon Black. Obviously being really careful around all the colours I've already painted. Just want to make sure I catch all of these details with some Abaddon Black. And for the ones on the stalks, I'm just painting a small spot in the middle of each of the eyes with some Abaddon Black as well. It's going to act like a pupil and add some interest to the model. Really make those eyes stand out on the model. So just applying a small spot of Abaddon Black in the middle of all the eyes. And with the eyes picked out, the model's really starting to come together. It's just a few more details left to paint. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And if you'd like to support the channel, please become a member by pressing the join button down below or joining me over on Patreon. So now with some Deepkin Flesh, I'm going to paint all the little mushrooms that are on the model. There's lots of these sort of little mushrooms growing out of him in certain places. So I'm just going to catch these with a layer of Deepkin Flesh. So I'm trying to sort of reuse as many colours where possible, so it keeps this all within sort of one kind of colour palette, ties the whole model together. Should create a really good looking model at the end of it. I'm just catching all of these mushrooms with some Deepkin Flesh. And with all of those mushrooms picked out, I'm going to apply a little bit of detailing to them. For this, I'm using Evil Sun Scarlet again. And I'm just going to pick out any of the raised details on the mushrooms. So they've got sort of these spots in the middle and then some lines coming out of there. So I'm picking these out with a bit of Evil Sun Scarlet. For this one here, it's got a raised edge as well. So as well as picking out the spot in the middle, I'm also trying to pick out just that very raised edge, just a very tip with some Evil Sun Scarlet, as well as picking out any of the raised parts leading out as well. You can do different parts on different mushrooms, mix it up a bit, create a bit of interest, but I'm just highlighting all the mushrooms. And with those mushrooms highlighted, added a pop of colour, broken up that green a little bit. So the next thing I'm going to paint is all the drool and things on the model. For this, I'm using Deepkin Flesh again. I'm going to dry brush this over all of the areas of sort of drool coming out of him. So this is going to brighten these areas up, maybe leave a little bit of the darker green showing in all the deepest areas, but it's going to brighten them up so I can apply a technical paint over them in the next step. So with that deepkin flesh, I'm just picking out all of the areas of sort of drool, goo, whatever it is that's coming out of this model. I'm just carefully dry brushing them with a bit of deepkin flesh just to brighten them up. There's some on the eyes, some around the mouth, just picking and choosing the areas I want to catch, making sure I get them with some deepkin flesh as a nice gentle highlight. With all those bits of slime and goo dry brushed, until we brighten them up with that deepkin flesh. So now with some Nurgle's Rawk technical paint, I'm going to apply this all over the areas we just dry brushed. So where we've left a bit of the dark green in all of those recesses, it's going to darken this technical paint down. But where this goes over that dry brush deepkin flesh, it's going to give a really sort of gooey, sickly kind of look to all of these. It dries with a really gloss finish, really does give the impression of sort of liquid goo. So I really like Nurgle's Rawk technical paint. Don't get to use it that often, but this model's a perfect place to use it. So it's really good to just dry brush over the area and then apply this paint. You can see how it's given that sort of sickly, shiny kind of goo effect. Looks really good. And now with some Eshen Grey, I'm going to begin the final process of this model. That's to paint the rock that he's sort of sitting on, where beholders seem to just float. To make it a model, it's sitting on these three kind of rock pillars. So I'm sticking to my no shades. I'm just going to highlight this with some dry brushing again, like I often do for stone. So I'm just making sure I coat all of the rock faces with some Eshen Grey first. It's a really nice dark grey colour. Will give a really nice base for my rock effects. So it might take a couple of layers to get a solid coat. I want to make sure I get this into all of the recesses. And just make sure I catch all of the stone with a couple of layers of Eshen Grey. With the Eshen Grey applied, picked out all of the stone. So now it's time to apply some dry brushes to highlight it. First dry brush I'm going to apply is Metalmania Standard Grey. And I can come in quite heavy with this one. Just want to make sure I leave the Eshen Grey in all the deepest recesses, but I'm going to catch all of the raised and flat areas with a dry brush of Metalmania Standard Grey. Hopefully with just about 3 dry brushes I'll get a really nice rock effect on the base or on these stones, which will tie in really well to the body as well. So both have that kind of dry brush effect, which ties the whole model together. And with the Metalmania Standard Grey dry brush, you can see it's brightened up that stone a little bit, but created all the shadow in the deepest areas. So now with some Dawnstone, I'm going to dry brush a little bit lighter than I did for the Metalmania Standard Grey, making sure I leave some of that layer showing, but just catching all of the rocks with a gentle dry brush of Dawnstone. See how this is picking out all the details to the rock, but keeping that sort of depth and definition we got from the previous dry brush. So it's a really good way to quickly and easily paint stone by just using a few dry brushes. And with the Dawnstone painted, there's just one final colour I want to dry brush onto these rocks just to finish them off. And that's with some Administratum Grey. I'm just going to dry brush, focusing from the top to the bottom again, so it picks out all the most upwards facing surfaces with the lightest of my dry brushes. I'm just dry brushing from the top down, making sure I pick out all the details with some Administratum Grey. And with the Administratum Grey applied, that is how to paint a quick and easy beholder, either for a child's toy or for some Dungeons and Dragons. So let me know in the comments down below, do you play D&D? What do you think of this model? But thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting.